Hello and welcome back to another video. And today we're going to be taking a first look at an upcoming Tier 9 Czechoslovakian medium tank with double barrels. It's called the SDT-57. I won't even attempt to say the second bit. If you are Czech, please let me know down in the comments. But here we go. It's going to be the first double-barreled medium tank coming to the game. It's looking quite interesting. It's going to be bringing a familiar statistical nature, so it is going to be very similar to already some of the double-barreled tanks we have in the game, but let's get into looking at it. So, 390 Alpha for a tier 9 medium tank is quite competitive. It's probably on the lower end of what you want nowadays, unfortunately, with today's alpha damage increase, but 390 Alpha is quite comfortable and will work pretty nice, especially in those tier 9, tier 10 games. In terms of penetration, it's a little bit weak in terms of standard penetrations, 245 millimeters AP. It would be nicer if that was an APCR shell. However, 245 AP is okay. 294 gold APCR is better, especially as it has decent shell velocities, so it will be quite a nice shell for kind of medium-ish distances when you're maybe wanting to be sniping a little bit. In terms of reload time, how this is going to work, 18 seconds is the total time to reload both barrels. So if you've doubled or if you're reloading right from the start of the game, it's going to take 18 seconds to get your 2 rounds into the 2 guns. It's 9 seconds for each gun. So if, for example, you have just doubled and then you need to get a shot out straight away afterwards, obviously you've got the lockout time, which we don't know yet, but I imagine it'll be in the region of about 2 to 3 seconds. You can then 9 seconds reload and you will have a shell which you can then fire cyclically. So you fire it one at a time. If you want to get both back in, once again, it's 18 seconds. Gun handling then. Okay, this is where it takes a little bit of a turn. 2.2 seconds aim time, that's nice. That is good. We like that for a medium tank. 2.2 to 2.4 is about where you want to be. 0.4 dispersion, however, is weak, and it will feel quite painful, especially at medium to long range. This tank has the gun statistics, the DPM, all of that thing going for it in terms of to be able to play that kind of pseudo-medium, pseudo-heavy role at closest range. However, we'll have a look in a second whether its armor does actually stack up. But 0.4 dispersion is quite painful and will almost mean running a V-stabs or maybe an improved aiming just to help that out a little bit. 8 degrees of gun depression, really quite nice. Pretty standard for Czechoslovakian tanks, however, but 8 degrees is lovely. Mobility, 50 forwards, 18 in reverse. That's quick, that's all right. You would probably consider having a turbo setup on this tank if it stays at 50. 50 is kind of on that medium end. It's kind of, if you want to play that pseudo-medium, pseudo-heavy role, which this thing's gun handling might force, you might want to be slightly quicker so you can get the first shot off in an engagement. However, if you don't need to get that first shot off, 50 is fine. Power to weight ratios are really quite okay on this tank. Not the best, but they're really quite okay. In terms of HP, 1700 is perfect. You will be able to run a hardening and pull this thing up to 1900, which means you can play that kind of tradey kind of style, which this thing probably will like. However, its armor. It has 180 millimeters frontally on the hull. However, as you can see on the model here up at the top, yeah, that thing has a huge lower plate. It almost actually has 2 lower plates. It has kind of a frontal glacis and then a lower glacis. I imagine both of those are going to be pretty weak, especially as it's a medium tank. And its upper hull does look extremely well angled, so I imagine that would be an auto ricochet. So its hull armor kind of looks a little bit poor, especially with its armor layout. Its turret, however, 230 millimeters on paper looks okay. It does resemble, in a way, I feel, the Progetto 65 turret, so the tier 10 Italian medium tank. It looks a little bit like that, where it might be quite strong around the gun. However, when you get out towards the outer extremities, it looks like there's quite a flat section on either side, which will probably be quite weak, especially to high pen, AP, and heat ammunition. It does look like it's got a slightly angled roof, which might be overmatchable by AP, and it does look like it's got a small cupola at the back, which, once again, pretty easy to pen, I imagine. So that's kind of the armor, and it doesn't particularly tell a story of a tank that can play that pseudo-medium, pseudo-heavy role, which its gun handling and its DPM might want it to do so. So we've got a little bit of an issue already identified there. But let's see how the SDT-57 stacks up to some tanks that are already in the game. And we're going to compare it to the Skoda T50, which is the Tech Tree Tier 9 Czechoslovakian medium, and the IS-32. Right at the start of the video, I said the SDT resembles a double-barreled heavy tank we already have in the game, and that is the IS-32. That is the Tier 9 Soviet double-barreled heavy tank. So I'm comparing a medium to a heavy. Yes, I know, a bit blasphemous. However, you will see the resemblance. So in terms of raw DPM, the SDT has 2,600. That's quite nice. It's better than the Skoda T50's 2,250, and the IS-32's 2,230. It's better. Do bear in mind the Skoda T50, however, does have an auto reloader, so it has a 3-round clip. It puts out 320 alpha for each, which is obviously different to the SDT and the IS-32. In terms of alpha, as I was just talking about, the SDT 390 for one shot, 780 for a double. The IS-32 390 for a single, 780 for a double. The Skoda T50 320 3 times. In terms of reload time, it's 9 seconds for one shot with the SDT, 18 for a double, 10.5 for the IS-32, and 21 for the double. So you can kind of see where the better DPM is coming in, especially for the SDT there. And obviously the Skoda, 22 seconds to reload its 3-round magazine. Salvo prep time. So that is once you've selected or clicked your button or held down your button of which you want to do a double, how long it actually takes to do that double. Well, for the SDT, it's 3 seconds, which is quite long. That will be quite painful, especially if you're needing to kind of snap or something that's crossing across a gap, or maybe do a clutch shot right at the end of the game. 3 seconds is quite painful, and it will feel significantly longer than the 2.5 seconds for the IS-32, even though it is only half a second. In terms of dispersion, 0.4 for the SDT, 0.35 for the Skoda T50, and 0.4 for the IS-32. So you can kind of see here how the SDT almost has a heavy tank gun, but on a medium tank. That's why I was kind of saying this thing is like a pseudo-medium, pseudo-heavy. It can kind of do the role of a heavy tank, but also the role of a medium tank due to its mobility. Aim time, once again, maybe starting to tell a little bit of a different story. 2.2 seconds is the same as the Skoda T50. 2.2 seconds is very traditional for a medium tank. As I said, 2.2, 2.4 is very standard for medium tanks. The IS-32 is 3 seconds, very standard for a heavy tank of that nature. However, the dispersion is the one which tells the story here and will be the big limiting factor. In terms of mobility, the SDT is as mobile as the Skoda T50, 50 forwards for both, and much more mobile than the IS-32's 38, once again, kind of saying and telling the story of how this thing can play like a heavy, but take the position earlier. In terms of gun depression, all 3 of these tanks have 8 degrees, which is once again quite comfortable. Probably the lower end of what you want in today's meta, unfortunately, which is increasingly hull down. In terms of HP, 1700, as I said, is really quite nice. It's better than the 1650 that the Skoda T50 has, and it's only 100 less than the IS-32, which once again is a heavy tank, so it is going to naturally have more HP. View range, pretty irrelevant, but 380, 400, 380. 380 is actually okay. However, you might want to run events on this thing. If you are events enjoyer, it would probably put it up to about 415, 418-ish. Armor. This is where, as I said, this thing starts to get a little bit interesting. On paper, this thing has better hull armor than the IS-32. However, in practice, I don't actually think that is the case, due to this thing's humongous lower plate, which basically dictates the entire front of the hull. And whereas the IS-32 has a nice kind of pike nose, which it can angle and will ricochet some shots, I don't feel like the SDT is going to have that luxury. Skoda T50 has a huge lower plate as well, but that's much, much, much thinner, so that gets penned by everything, even by HE. In terms of the turret armor, it has 230, which is much better than the Skoda T50. The Skoda T50 is very much an assassin tank. It plays that way with its auto reloader, where it dumps out 320, 320, 320, and then reloads. The SDT is going to kind of play that more traditional, maybe medium tank role of heavy medium role. Think tanks like the 430U or the 140, where it can take an aggressive position and it can do its DPM whilst relying a little bit on its armor. 230 will bounce some shots. Like I said, It looks quite strong around the gun, weaker towards the outer extremities, but it isn't going to match up to the 280 that the IS-32 has, which does fall weakness to heat ammunition. However, generally it's pretty strong. In terms of penetration, in terms of standard penetration, it's almost identical across the board here. 245 for the SDT, 248 for the T50, and 243 for the IS-32. Pretty standard, apart from the Skoda T50 gets a really quite nice APCR round. And then gold penetration, it's APCR for the SDT, which is the same as the IS-32. It's better penetration than the IS-32, which is quite nice, 294 compared to 292. However, neither of the two double-barrel tanks stack up to the auto reloader, sorry, the Skoda T50 with its 310 heat, which is actually really quite nice at TN9. So there you go, guys. That is the SDT Vlkodav, and that's me attempting to say it. It looks interesting. I think it looks statistically quite good. However, it is probably going to be held back by its poor dispersion values and its lack of hull armor and potentially lack of turret armor. I think it's going to be forced to play a kind of pseudo-heavy role where it will want to take those aggressive positions into a city brawl or to where the heavy tanks go, maybe get an early double barrel off and then kind of play off its DPM and play quite chancy, quite annoying shots. But as to how effective it will be at that in terms of its armor and being able to trade effectively, we're yet to see. I don't think it'll be particularly great at trading because of its 3 seconds prep time for a double barrel. So if it's peaking a tank that has a higher alpha than it, it's likely going to be out-traded. But in general, I think the tank looks okay. As to when we're probably going to see this screams to me a Battle Pass collaboration tank. It really just does. It's got that kind of new gimmicky feature, which will attract people to wanting to buy the Battle Pass and grind through it. Either that, probably in some boxes towards the end of 2025. But do let me know down in the comments, what do you think about this tank? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? When do you think we're going to see it? And if you did like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all again very soon.